learners, and welcome to your language arts lesson for today. Before we get started, I want you to make sure you get your materials ready. So for today, you're going to need your language arts binder, that's that white binder, your language arts materials packet, which is this folder of things, your language arts notebook, that's the black notebook, and if you don't have a language arts notebook, that's fine, just get a piece of loose leaf and we'll work there, and then you'll need a pencil. And as you guys are making sure you're getting those materials, so if you need to pause, here they are. We are going to go over your Oliver Hyde story arc from homework, so if that's for some reason is not with those materials, you should get that out as well. All right, so first thing we're going to do is go over that story arc together. So I learned that I did not have a copy of this, so I made my own arc, which is fine. Actually, as we move through the year, you're just going to that's going to be our habit every time, that you guys will be making your own story arc, which is great. Thanks while I get situated. So, Oliver Hyde, I told you this was going to be a little trickier, so it might be harder, but I gave some hints in the lesson, and then if you read along with the video as well, you might have gotten more hints. So remember, we're working on direct quotes, which means using the author's exact words. So, setting first. Characters are always a great setting. So I think Oliver Hyde is an obvious choice for setting information. You could talk a lot about where he lives. I think a really important piece of background information of something that happened before the story started was that his wife died. So you could say, I'm going to pick this quote. It killed her, horse and all. So this is our part where we see that his wife died. The quote from the rhyme that the kids sang would be another one. The beautiful bride of Oliver Hyde fell down dead on the mountainside. But I think that that's a really important piece of background information. Now, you might have picked something other, I'm trying to get this on there for you guys, than those two things. But it should be pretty early to the story if we're picking setting information. Next, I've been asking you guys to go to falling action. I gave some hints, right? This is a little bit different than some of the stories that we've been doing because Oliver wasn't in a life or death situation. But I talked to you about trying to identify, right? We see from the story that he is lonely and sad, and and he kind of seems to be pushing people away from him throughout the story. And so I encouraged you to look for the moment when we know for certain that Oliver is going to choose one or the other. Does he kind of continue that moment and that pivotal moment? Does he continue to choose to be pushing people away, or does he choose to make a connection? And by the end of the story, we see that what he chooses to do is to make a connection. He chooses to let people in. So where is the quote that we know for certain that that's true? And again, looking towards the end. And this is that moment when we know for certain, right? He tells everyone, never mind that, and everyone else too. Just be regular and dance. I'll fiddle for you. So those quotes, you could have had the whole thing or maybe a part of that. Would be great quotes when we see that he actually is welcoming them in. So I'm going to write down, just be regular and dance. So then remember, climax should come right before them. So then Jim took out a large dishcloth. Oliver touched him on the arm. Okay, this would be the perfect quote for our climax. Again, this is the moment when we don't know. Is Oliver going to say, yep, great, you guys all should stay covered because I'm trying to keep you as far away from me as possible? Or does he change his mind? And we see that he changes his mind. So then Jim took out a large dishcloth. Or if you had the sentence after that, Oliver touched him on the arm, that would be another option. Okay? Now, rising action, we know this is a long story, so it would be, incredibly impressive if we happened to pick the same things. You can really pick a whole lot of different parts of the story, but you're picking two things. So, I'm going to pick the reason I came, Oliver, was to ask you to come and play the fiddle. Again, you might not have picked this quote, and that's great. There are other quotes. We'll see another option. We'll just say, when Oliver says, I'll give them a wretched time. Again, most of the story is rising action. So you probably picked two different things than I did, and that's great. Finally, that resolution or denouement, there's kind of a few options. This is different than our other stories. There's a whole bunch of things, but I think this last line of the story is a perfect resolution. Ah, they had a wonderful time, Oliver included. I'm going to move this and write it. So fifth graders, your setting maybe is a little bit different, though probably not much. Your rising action might be a lot different. But your climax, falling action, and resolution should be pretty much what I have. So making corrections in a different pen. And again, we're working on it. So I want you to just make sure that you understand why this is the climax, why this is the falling action. If not, ask questions, because it is something that we'll kind of keep working on as we go. And I do know that it's tricky. So these can go into, once you've made your corrections, into that front pocket of your language arts binder. And then we're going to get in with today's lesson. So fifth graders, our objective for today is going to be practicing with mood. Okay, we introduced it in our previous lesson, and so now we're going to do some practice with it. So as a reminder, mood is the tone or emotion that the author wants to create for the reader. So it's kind of that emotion of the story, the tone of that story. And I encouraged you, as you were reading Oliver Hyde the other day, to be considering mood as it pertains to Oliver Hyde. And if you were paying attention as you were reading and kind of thinking about mood and how it plays out, you might have had these thoughts of like, well, it seemed kind of like one mood and then maybe another mood and then maybe another mood. And I agree. And so what we're actually going to do today is spend a little time working together on identifying some textual evidence that seems to support different moods. Okay, so if you have your Black Language Arts notebook, then you're going to go ahead and get that open to a fresh page. And if you don't, that's also fine. Just get a piece of loose leaf and we're going to work together. I actually am working on a piece of loose leaf so you can mirror what I'm doing. So I'm going to flip you back around. So I want you to create on your piece of loose leaf 3 columns. You might want to go the long way, and that's fine if you want to. I'm going to go this way, but again, you could choose to go the long way. We're also going to label this assignment, I should have said. Oliver Hyde, mood. Okay, so I want you to think, as you were thinking about the story yesterday and the mood that you were reading, I want you to think about what moods maybe stood out to you. So as I think about these moods, I kind of think of a few things. I think there were parts of the story that seemed a little scary. I think there were parts of the story that seemed a little sad. And I think that there were parts of the story that seemed happy, joyful, okay? Did you have any of those same moods that I was thinking about? Maybe. So, I'd actually be curious if someone thought of something different than that. So what we're actually going to do, 5th graders, is we're going to be reading through Oliver Hyde again. And I want you to be looking for textual evidence. Remember that as we talked about mood, we said that the author creates a mood by the words that he or she chooses, or maybe the setting that he or she describes. So as we're reading through Oliver Hyde again, we're going to be trying to notice what kinds of words does the author choose that makes us think something is maybe scary or sad or happy, okay? What kinds of setting description maybe creates that mood? So if you are setting up in your workspace, I want it to look pretty much like this, okay? I have my copy of the story, and I have my notes set up so that I can take notes as I go. So I will be reading to you, and as I'm reading, I want you to be following along. But as you hear me say something that seems to be setting a particular mood, I want you to write that down. I'll model it a bit at the beginning, and then we'll see where we end up. So Oliver Hyde's Dishcloth Concert by Richard Kennedy. Now maybe it's sad, and maybe it's spooky, but there was a man who lived just out of town on a scrubby farm, and no one had seen his face for years. And then right away we already have some evidence. The narrator tells us maybe it's sad. Maybe it's spooky. So in this case, there's just one word that seems to be setting it up. I also like this description, scrubby farm. A scrubby farm. And I'm not totally sure if that seems scary or sad, but I think it doesn't seem happy, right? You don't usually describe a happy place as a scrubby farm. I'm going to pick spooky. But I think you could also argue, well, that seems kind of sad to me. If he was outside working, he kept his hat pulled down and his collar turned up. And if anyone approached him, he ran up the hill to his house and shut himself inside. It helps that I finished the story, but I think hat pulled down seems sad. Collar turned up. We know that Oliver Hyde is kind of shutting people out, so those ones seem sad to me. Even that line, shut himself inside, seems sad. He left notes pinned to his door for a brave errand boy who brought him supplies from town. The people asked the boy what he heard up there in that tomb-like house when he collected the notes and delivered the supplies. I love that description of that house. Tomb-like house. A tomb. This is where people who have died are buried in a tomb. So to describe a house as tomb-like seems scary. Or, maybe even sad, right? But the idea that Oliver is inside that house that is described as tomb-like should get us thinking about the mood. Darkness and quietness, said the boy. I hear darkness and quietness. I think at this point the townspeople seem to be kind of scared of Oliver. So I'm going to put these in the scary column. The people nodded and looked at the boy. Aren't you afraid? The boy bit his lip. A fellow has to make a living, he said. Sometimes the children would come out of town and sing a little song up at the house and then run away. They sang, "The beautiful bride of Oliver Hyde fell down dead on the mountainside." That part is very sad to me. Yes, it was true. The man was full of grief and bitterness. Grief. Grief is a word for extreme sadness. And this idea that he's bitter, this is sort of like almost that he's angry. He's so sad that he's angry. He's angry that this has happened to him or happened to his wife. He was Oliver Hyde, and his young bride's wagon had been washed away into a canyon by a mudslide and had killed her horse and all. But that was years ago. The children sang some more. Oliver Hyde is a strange old man. He sticks his head in a coffee can and hides his face when there's folks about. He's outside in and he's inside out. Maybe you want to pause and write some things down from what I just read there. It was too bad. Oliver used to have many friends, and he played the fastest and sweetest fiddle in the country. And for the few short weeks he was married, his playing was sweeter than ever. But on the day his wife was buried, he busted his fiddle across a porch post, and now he sat, cold, dark, and quiet on his little hill. No one had visited him for years. There was a reason. You shall see. Again, it helps that we finished the story already, but if I had read that line, there was a reason, you shall see, that actually might kind of scare me a little bit. You shall see. But I also think no one had visited him for years. It seems sad. One day a man came from the town and walked up the hill toward Oliver's house. He was carrying a fiddle case. 2 or 3 times he stopped and looked up at the house and shook his head, as if trying to free himself from a ghost, and continued on. This is a simile here, right? As if he is trying to free himself from a ghost. But again, this kind of seems like a scary thing, right? To describe a ghost haunting him. He arrived at the porch steps. All the window shades were pulled down, and it was dead quiet inside. Oh, I love that description, right? And this is a choice, right? The author's choice. When we say that the author's making these choices in order to set a mood, you say quiet, you say silent, right? But dead quiet. That was a deliberate choice on the author's part. The 3 porch steps creaked like cats moaning in their dreams. I love that description. Another simile. It's using that word like to compare the steps to cats. Creaked like cats moaning in their dreams. And the man knocked on the door. For a little bit it was quiet. Then there was the sound of a chair being scooted across the floor. A voice said, "Come in." The man opened the door a crack and peeked inside. "Oliver," he said, "it's me, Jim." No answer. Even that seems a little bit scary, right? No answer. And right now, there's not a lot that we know about Oliver. Jim opened the door farther and put a foot inside. It was dark and smelled stale. And so we see the author keeps making these choices to set a certain mood. There's uncertainty for us at this point. Jim opened the door all the way. Off in a corner where the light didn't touch sat a figure in a chair, perfectly upright, with his hands on his knees like a stone god, as still and silent as 1,000 years ago. The head was completely draped with a dishcloth. Not a breath ruffled the ghost head. Very interesting. So 5th graders, as we've read so far, I see a lot of scary, quite a bit of sad, and so far we don't really see happy. However, there seems to be a moment in the story when things change. So 5th graders, for your practice, what I would like for you to do, we've read through part of the story. I would like you to continue reading through the story. I have the recording from yesterday or from the previous lesson, so you could listen and follow along with that recording from the last time. But I want you to finish the story, and I want you to finish this chart. I want you to keep adding textual evidence that seems to support the mood. Okay, this is how you're going to practice for your homework assignment. And if you do this well, you should find that your homework assignment comes pretty naturally. So again, I'm going to repeat. You can read on your own and finish your chart. Or you can go back to the video that I posted on the previous lesson where I'm reading to you, and you could continue to follow along while you're listening to me read and complete. Okay? For homework, so again, this is your practice work. For homework, in your packet, you should find this Oliver Hyde mood assignment. The directions tell you to complete the following sentences based on what we've been learning about mood. Okay, you're going to identify the mood or a mood in the middle of Oliver Hyde's Dishcloth Concert. So far we've really kind of focused on the beginning of the story. So you want to identify the mood from the middle of the story. And then you're going to support it with textual evidence, okay? Picking quotes from the story that seem to support your mood, okay? It could be a short quote, it could be a long quote. That's fine. And then finally, I'm very specific. The mood in the last 3 paragraphs. So the very end of the story of Oliver Hyde's Dishcloth Concert is blank. And then again, you're going to pick textual evidence. So this is your practice work. This is your homework, which I want you to take a picture of and submit to me, okay? Good luck, 5th graders. Let me know if you have questions. I can't wait to see what you guys have come up with in terms of mood and textual evidence.